Good evening and welcome to the pre-budget discussion where we're going to be attempting to dissect as well as predict what kinds of instruments will be used in the next budget. It's probably one of the most exciting budgets in the history of the tabling of budgets in this country, simply because as soon as an hour after tabling, the media will be all out in full force, all guns blazing, if they find the budget has fallen short of their aspirations. It's a brave new era here in Malaysia, and you can hear conversations about the budget being spoken in many circles and different broads and lengths. But the scrutiny will be intense for the very first time, and the scrutiny will come from every sector in society. We're going to see all this play out come November 2nd. But for now, here on RTM and on TV1, we're going to try and predict some of the contents of the budget 2019. One of the main questions will be, of course, debt. And what is debt? How do we define debt? And based on that, I believe all other things will follow. We're going to also discuss, based on the broad strokes laid out under the review, which was tabled by the Honourable Prime Minister on Rancangan Malaysia ke-11. So let's get into some of the salient points which were brought up by the tabling of that review. First and foremost being, of course, reforming governance, which is a welcome proposition. That's already kicked into gear, and we're going to see some changes in the way governance is delivered on all sectors of society. So that is one of the main thrusts. Now, the other thrust that also will be something that we're looking forward to is inclusiveness and how to enhance that inclusiveness in development. It was also highlighted by the Prime Minister. When we look at the region, we see one of the most hotbeds when it comes to economy, and regional development is something we're also going to be pursuing moving forward as a nation. ASEAN is poised to be one of the biggest economic blocs in the world, and a lot of development is focused in this area. We'd be at a loss if we did not take advantage of this. Human capital is another one of those main thrusts, and empowering human capital will be something that should be focused on in the next budget, just to piggyback on what the Honourable Prime Minister presented in his review. The environment, something Donald Trump's not too fond of, but here in Malaysia we're still putting it as one of our key thrusts. So we're going to try our best to see which parts of the budget can actually help the environment. That carbon tax that's up in the air could be something of a factor. We'll talk to our guests about that. And overall, economic growth. So 6 basic thrusts, 6 basic principles outlined by the Honourable Prime Minister. These are going to be playing out in broad strokes, but we're going to try and draw some of the fine prints as we move forward. So let's bring up all 6 so you can see them quite clearly here. We've got all 6, just to kind of recap the 6 broad strokes that you can look at and also try and emphasize your understanding of the budget in these terms. So as we go to break, I just want to quickly highlight that this is just going to be the broad base for our conversation. We're of course going to touch on some issues that you could have definitely quizzed yourself about, and we're going to try and move forward along those lines. So stay with us, don't go anywhere. This is going to be quite an interesting discussion, and we're going to start with our take on the streets. We took our cameras out to find out what you, Malaysia, want from the budget. Let's take a look.
This is the first time the new government is going to table the 2019 budget. As a practitioner in terms of tax advisor, tax consultant, we very much hope that the government is responsible drafting the budget, and the government has to ensure that it won't burden the rakyat, because that is the main promise that they made under the manifesto, to ensure that the rakyat are not burdened by the tax system. Above that, we also hope that a lot of incentives should be given to the new economy, like the digital economy. And at the same time, these industry players, in terms of the digital economy, the online business people, should pay a fair amount of tax to the government to ensure that their business properly, in terms of the environment, in terms of the economic environment of the country, should propel them to be in a better position. And in terms of income, we understand that recently the Prime Minister made a statement that there will be new taxes to be introduced. So we very much hope that the new taxes that the government intend to introduce won't burden the rakyat as a whole, and at the same time won't burden the higher income group. And we have to ensure that they stay in Malaysia in terms of individual or companies, and still loyal to the Malaysian government, to the country, in terms of paying tax. Hopefully it is a good budget. I know we in the association, we know that it is a testing time. It is a very challenging time now for Malaysia. With the new government and with the current economic position, current financial position of the country, in terms of debts, it is very difficult and very challenging for the new government to draft the budget 2019. But we hope that it is a good budget, a well-balanced budget that will satisfy the needs of the people, and at the same time will help the government, the new government, to administer the country, inshallah.
Well, that was the president of the Malaysian Association of Tax Accountants, MATA, Dato' Abdul Aziz, chiming in. We'll also have Manoharan Moten, who's the chief economist of Alliance Bank, chiming in towards the end of the program. And finally, we'll actually go out and ask the public what they want. But for now, joining me in the studio, we have two guests to help pick apart this expectation of Malaysia. Pre-budget 2019 focuses on tackling challenges, and here to help me tackle that challenge, we have Associate Professor Dr. Baharom Abdul Hamid, who is the Director of Research Management Center with the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance. And we have Firdaus Rosli, Director of Economics, Trade and Regional Integration at ISIS, or the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome to the program. Let's start with a tough one, the debt. A lot has been said about debt. And since the new government took over, they painted debt to be at 1 trillion. That was a point of contention when the Prime Minister tabled the Rancangan Malaysia ke-11 review. Debt came back to 686 billion. So how come the figures don't match? What's the calculation that we're going to use in this budget? Because I believe all things will follow from that calculation. Professor.
There's a $1 trillion question, Terence.
Indeed.
Well, it's a matter of definition. When we talk about debt, are we talking about debt alone? Are we talking about debt and liability? So if we go on a basic definition of debt, no argument, 686 billion. But we have two more parts inside there, two more components. The government's commitment. The government have committed, the government have guaranteed, which is we call the government guarantee. For example, for the entities such like Dana Infra, about 42 billion, GovCo Holding, 8.8 billion, Prasarana, Malaysian Rail Sendirian Berhad, and of course, 1MDB.
Yes.
And on top of that, we have what we call the public-private partnership on the infrastructure of building hospitals, schools, roads, and we have this lease payment to make. So if you take into account all this, debt alone, 686 billion, then you put in the government guarantee, it comes to about 857 billion, then you top it up with the public-private partnership lease payment, it goes beyond 1 trillion.
So we're saying it's always been there. It's just that we haven't factored it into the budget. Firdaus.
Yes, I completely agree with what Dr. Baharom said, that it's just a matter of definition, one. And secondly, I think the one that we have not clearly defined is the two portions, the other two portions instead of the debt alone, which is government guarantee as well as the PPP projects. The thing is, I think there is a need for, perhaps there is a need for the government to review many of this, the debt, or rather the debt plus liabilities question, simply because there is a need for the government, or at least the current coalition, to look into how government procurement is being formulated in the past, and how they can look into how that would be formulated or reformed in the future. So there is a narrative here that we have to look into government procurement, because if I were the government of today, and if I were to say, let's review government procurement, then a lot of people is going to be not entirely happy with that notion
jumpy,
alone.
I would say.
Yeah, but you have to create that narrative that, we have to look into this. But we have to look into this because the debt is big, because PPP is not clear, because there is a notion coming out from this. And it was actually being seconded by the finance minister recently, by saying that there is a need for the government to look into PPP projects and how they can improve the formulation of government procurement in the future, which also seconded by the fact that the RMK 11 review touched upon the need for the government to review government procurement practices.
I also want to come to the finance minister. It used to be that when the finance minister tabled something or says something, there's a lot less challenge. These days, the finance minister is under tremendous scrutiny from many different fronts. He's got his shadow counterpart now in Khairi Jamaluddin, and also the former finance minister, who still looms about giving him pressure. How does this factor into his formulation of the budget? Will he be thinking about all these issues?
If I may, Terence, I would like to bring an anecdote to it. There's a very famous story, I would say, about the blind man and the elephant. They have their own versions. Each of them, he said, one of them say it looks like a robe, the other say it looks like a trunk and everything. Well, in the case of the blind man and the elephant, it was a genuine differences because of the limitation that they face. But in the current situation, in the current political context, in the current situation in Malaysia, these people are not blind, but they still insist on their definition of their own. While, the previous cohort or previous regime or previous government, whatever it is, they would want to suppress the debt to show that, what they have left. Of course, the new cohort, the new government might inflate it. But I would say, yes, our level of debt is quite, debt and liability is quite worrying. In fact, if you could see the latest things happening, how the consolidated fund was used to repay some of the government guarantee. So this shows the cruciality or the seriousness of why the government guarantee as well as the PPP should also be taken into context. Yeah, I second what Firdaus have said. We need to look at the pillar of the governance. We need to re-look at the governance pillar to stop or to make, to cover for the leakages to happen.
But if we follow the international definitions of debt for our calculations, that will give us a more rosier picture at the end of it, because we have a lot less to contend with debt-wise. And the ratings agencies, they're looking at these international definitions. So why not just stick to the original, internationally accepted definition of debt, Firdaus?
Yeah, I think we have to take into account reports coming from rating agencies as well as other financial institutions with regards to our debt level. None of them are saying that 1 trillion is incorrect. None of them are saying that the 636 billion are also incorrect. So they're saying that both are in fact correct.
Back to our blind man analogy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a matter of definition. So again, going back to what I said earlier, it's perhaps how and why the government needs to put that into context, because there is a need for us to look into practices of government procurement, because as we understand it, that is probably the easiest and the fastest way for corruption to happen.
I would say from a public perspective, it's just that it's quite tiring to hear the finance minister keep coming up with new expenditures, which we never knew existed before. But now suddenly, hey, here they are. We just dug them out of storage. So in the budget, it would be great if he can just lay everything on the line and set the definition for the country. And then we can move forward from there without coming out with new things along the way. So that's one hope that I think a lot of people are echoing right now. They want to see an end to politicking and a move forward in terms of financial direction. GST, SST, the debate is settled. We have a new system of tax. However, this new system of tax leaves us one thing in terms of revenue. How are we going to solve this?
Terence, definitely it will affect the revenue because the number of goods and services that's being taxed have reduced to 2/3 of the original in the GST. I've mentioned this many times, I've even written about it. GST technically is superior. But in the Malaysian context, because of governance issue, GST is a multi-layered tax. So what happens, all the intermediate parties could get their tax that they have paid reimbursed. But because of governance issue, the reimbursable was not coming.
It's finally coming.
Delayed. Yeah. So what happened? They went for a shortcut.
Right.
They start increasing the prices. So imagine you have multiple layers start increasing the prices at multiple level. That's why the man on the street made a decision at the ballot box.
But those layers are gone. The prices are still high. There will be a one-off refund, I believe, in this budget, which will cater to all those backlogs. And this will be a one-off that will severely affect deficit, I think. But nevertheless, it has to be done. Your take on this, Firdaus. Where are we going to get that extra revenue now that we have to commit to refunding this huge chunk of money?
Let me break down that question of yours. One is that the level of deficit. As mentioned by Prime Minister in the tabling of midterm review of RMK11, he said that by 2020, our deficit is going to be at 3%. It's going to be much higher than that now, and then it will probably gradually reduce to 3%. So we can expect a couple of things. One, as far as OPEX is concerned, it's not going to be much different than in previous years. That's one. Second, we can also expect that if there's any haircuts on that note, it will probably be on the DevEx side. As a result of that, we can perhaps anticipate that there will be a very little room for the government to invest for the country's future. That's number one. Number two, it's with where the money is going to come from. Well, there has been talks about whether introducing new forms of tax outside the direct tax, outside the consumption tax that we usually hear of. But I think it would probably be a bit premature for the government to undertake those. Because if you see that there are a lot of high-income countries, advanced countries, who have these different types of taxes, but they all have one very, very good and robust income tax as a solid form of direct tax. Second, we don't have that competitive advantage in this region. We have to take note of that. Secondly, we don't have a good consumption tax after the removal of the GST. So for us to introduce other types of tax will probably be like as if we're skipping a page of taxation textbook.
And progressing right to the higher level.
We somehow jump the topic, you see. We have to get these two correct first. Then we can introduce other type of taxes that would probably make sense in addressing countries.
I see your point, but there's also this research done by Khazanah Research Institute that indicates that the top 20% of Malaysia is moving too far in terms of that income gap. So to correct that income gap, could a tax that affects only the top 20 be something logical? Professor?
I totally agree with you. It's not a secret, Terence, in the income inequality is worsening in Malaysia. And I honestly believe that the top 20, there should be some form of taxation for them to recontribute back to the nation. So rather than they look at it as a burden, but they should be looking at it as a sacrifice or income purification, or any which way you want to look at it. It's a national service. They are the only bracket where, a 1% or 2% of tax that you put upon them, but you can cover more from the B40. So I honestly believe there are quite a number of tax that we can look at, if you want to talk about CGT. There are a lot of things that we can explore. But this cannot be in a knee-jerk reaction type. There has to be a proper study, a proper mechanism.
All right, let's get the opinion of Manokaran Motain, who is the Chief Economist of Alliance Bank Malaysia. We took our cameras out to him. Let's find out what he has to say and his predictions for the coming budget.
We are looking for some kind of clarity of the policies going forward. Okay. Now the thing is already the fears are already in the market. You know, if you look at the last few days, last week and now since the Malaysia, the dawn of new era conference. After that, you already can, you see the market downtrend. It is not largely because of any announcement during the thing. It is also exaggerated by the external market meltdown, global market meltdown. So you can see that in the conference, already indicated this budget will be a budget of sacrifice. Okay, GST has been removed, so that has sort of like going to lower the revenue quite almost like half of the tax collection from GST. So you can see that it was stopped, 1st June. That means it's almost like 7 months of revenue is lost there. So although you have, then you brought in SST in September. So there is almost like 2 months plus, of no collection of, it's a tax-free period. Okay, so there is a gap there.
He started off with the same question we did, clarity. Everyone's looking for clarity in definition, in terminologies. But he also did mention that the economy is not in the best of shape. This less than rosy picture is something that we are seeing across every sector. Is this a knee-jerk reaction to what's happened at the ballot box? And how long will this period last, in your opinion?
I would like to bring you towards what he said about the sacrifice budget. Yeah, I would call it the bite the bullet budget. That's what had been said by the finance minister. I'm looking for a balanced budget this time. People might say that, and I might be the minority looking for a balanced budget. Why? If it's a deficit budget, there might be two shortcomings inside there. Number one, the rating agency might be looking at it and say it's high time for us to re-evaluate. And now, it might be A-, and if the deficit is too big, where is the government going to get the money? You're already in deep problems, how are you going to recover? Another problem about this deficit budget is, talking about the Ricardian equivalence, whenever there's a deficit budget, people who are forward-looking, they would not want to spend, because a deficit budget now would give a signal that tax would be higher in the future. So they would not spend and they would start to save more. And this would, in a way, stunt the economic growth. It might give a wrong signal to the people. For that solely reason, and another reason, like I said, while the finance minister have start mentioning something, and the prime minister have already said that operational budget we can't do much because it's operational. But they have done some positive things. They have shut down some of the departments which are overlapping. They have closed down a few political appointees. We could save a few billions here and there. But development budget in the media review, if I'm not mistaken, was cut by almost 40 billion. But my honest hope is it should not jeopardize the health sector, education sector. While we want to be, we want to drive austerity, but we do not want this productive sector to have a negative impact. So I really hope that in this budget, it will be a balanced budget with a certain amount, proper amount given to health, education, and other productive sectors.
What do you think this budget will look like? We've heard many terminologies used, a lot of them quite scary, bite the bullet budget. Some have mentioned austerity, which I don't think we're getting into. How scary is the budget going to be?
On a personal note, I do not think that the upcoming budget is going to be much different than in previous years. With an exception of taking into account the fall in revenue thanks to GST removal. And that will probably cut not in the, like I said, OPEX, but more on DevEx. That's pretty much what I would venture into.
Well, we're going to leave the conversation there for just a quick moment. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue. We also have the view from the street coming as we take the cameras out to find out what Malaysians feel they want from the budget. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back as we attempt to predict Budget 2019.
Kita telah mencapai pingat emas di peringkat antarabangsa dan dalam negara. Tarian tradisi Cina, Melayu, India dan juga klasik ballet.
Kita bergerak, senang nak kendalikan.
Satu penambahan idea baru.
Pelbagai segmen menarik menanti anda dalam Agrotech. Kisah kejayaan dan perkembangan inovasi teknologi pertanian negara dikongsi dalam satu program. Saksikan Agrotech setiap Sabtu 6 petang semestinya di TV1.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. We're just talking off the camera about some of the things that can be expected in this budget. One of the salient points that has been a highlight in every budget leading up to this one is, of course, the aid. Targeted subsidies was the word used. And it's back on the table pretty much as the new government finds ways to target fuel subsidies, as well as try to match some of the things that the previous government did, despite having a lot less to play with. So let's talk about subsidies. Let's talk about how the new government needs to frame this so it can help the B40 community. Prof.
Okay, there's actually two ways looking at this. You know, one is a subsidy, we call it the carrot approach, or you have the tax, which is the stick approach. Like I said, the previous government, or all this while we have been going on the carrot approach. One of the most popular carrot is BRIM. Well, everyone knows that BRIM is given to the B40, to help them to cushion the increase in the prices of goods and services and so on. But BRIM is non-productive. It just evaporates. It doesn't regenerate into the economy. Same goes for the others. All this while for green, renewable energy and green energy, the government have been subsidizing them. If you invest in solar panel, we will subsidize you. If a company wants to invest in green energy, efficient energy, we will subsidize you. I think it's leaving a big gaping hole in the government's coffers. I honestly believe, what Tun have said, his visions about introducing this carbon tax. The end result of this game is the same. We want people to migrate to use more green energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency equipment and everything. For the sole reason, sustainable world. A carbon tax that is imposed would not only push people towards using renewable energy and green energy, at the same time would also give an extra revenue to the government. I think it's high time for us to go down and say to the people, I totally understand. The government might be thinking about how if I suddenly stop this BRIM, what would the people say? What would the voters say? Would it be a backlash? But sometimes the truth hurts, but we should be looking at a long-term development rather than just pleasing everybody. Sometimes we have to take the hard step.
That money is a feel-good factor thing attached to it. When you receive a targeted subsidy, you feel good. And at that point in time, you feel a little richer than you should probably be. So how do we circumvent that? How do we help the people still cushion some of the blows that will be dealt by a weakening economy, a weaker ringgit, without targeted subsidies, Firdaus?
I think the notion that, any kind of assistance that would be relooked in the upcoming budget is based on what the minister has been saying, what the finance minister has been saying, and perhaps even the PM as well. But the thing is, if we were to look at it in a more concrete manner, a lot of discussion would have to take place first before you can remove many of these things.
Right.
Because otherwise, when you introduce these measures come November 2nd, then people go like, what just happened? So I've not heard or seen any kind of discussion leading to this. That's why I think that it wouldn't be much difference compared to in previous years. That's number one. Number two is that the problem about targeted subsidies is not about targeted subsidies themselves. It's about whether we have a basis for us to compare, for us to evaluate, for us to see whether whether things work. BRIM has that kind of basis, but it was not done. It was not done in a way that, if we can identify and specify who gets what every time for the last 5 years, there's something structural about these people. Why are they not, being able to get other kind of assistance? Or why are they not be able to supplement their income compared to BRIM? So, we can measure this. We can understand their nature and then move forward. But, any kind of subsidies, any kind of assistance that we have today have no basis whatsoever to evaluate and to monitor. And I think that's probably our biggest problem.
Considering we have the technology to do it, we have the ability to create databases, we have the ability to track algorithms, we can develop a pattern to figure out how to get our poorest communities out of poverty. But the fact is we haven't done it. So I think that's a very good point. And moving forward, I think the Ministry of Finance, if you're listening in, you should implement something like this. If you're still going to give out those subsidies, at least track them, at least evaluate them, and at least create an algorithm of how to move people out of those brackets.
Yeah. But Terence, let me add to this discussion. Number one, if we can evaluate many of these things, we can also ascertain whether or not it makes sense today. And if they don't, then you got to phase them out. And if you phase them out, which means that's, one or two or maybe many agencies, government agencies, will have to probably close down. Which means that enrollment will go down, and many others will also be affected. It's not just about the targeted subsidy; it's the government itself. The reluctance on the government side to reform is perhaps more on the government itself rather than on the people, because that would change how public policy is being formulated. How are we going to address many of these things in the future? And it's not just as simple as us taking things away from the people.
But I do agree. Coming back to the pillar, remember the governance.
Right, the first one.
So the first one is the governance. So if we could tackle that governance part, I believe we could achieve quite a number of things. Going back to the comment earlier that the chief economist made about clarity, and what we have also been talking about clarity. I think I've been listening to budget for quite some time, for 20 odd years, 30 years. I think this is the first budget where it's quite mysterious. All the time, during pre-budget, you could more or less predict what's going on, where the ministries, the ministers, the prime minister would all speak with the same language, same voice.
But may I interrupt you there and just say that the finance minister delivered a talk at the New Dawn Summit called Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dividends. He wants to keep it a secret.
He wants to keep it hidden. That's why I say, if you talk about carbon tax, on one side in the mid-review plan, Tun was saying that we intend to introduce carbon tax. A day after, the minister, Yobi Yin, said, we have no intention of introducing carbon tax. So
there is the contradiction that's still going on. I do think this is a new government, and they're still finding their feet, so to speak. So when one minister says something and another kind of contradicts him or her, it does shed that they're not really on the same page all the time. which is good and bad. They're able to contradict and provide check and balance for their agencies and their departments. That's the good of it, but the bad is that they're not on the same page. So perhaps moving forward, we would also like to see more uniformity. You can fault the Barisan National Government for many things, but they were always on the same page when it came to delivering a budget. Yeah. Everybody knew what their ministries were getting, and they had the fine points. So let's move into one of the other pillars, which I believe is an expanding pillar. It's on pursuing a balanced regional development. And we're seeing ASEAN as a hot basin for growth. How do we capitalize on growth? How do we expand our markets despite having a smaller amount of money for development? Firdaus.
You see, I think there's a conundrum here. On the one hand, we know that we are, as a trading nation, we have to continue looking for market access, deepen our existing traditional access with traditional partners and so on. But on the one hand, reform seems to be taken quite, under a negative pretext, simply because it changes things. Because many of us will not be able to operate like how we used to. So the balance between the two is still not entirely clear. So when it comes to getting regional development as far as trade is concerned, perhaps, I think that can be a little bit tricky, simply because, the world today is going towards a more high-quality agreements. So which means that it's not just about trade and investment that is being covered under trade agreements, but doing business, things like environment, things like labor, things like investor confidence through investor-state dispute settlement and so on. Those might matter, and those matter to investors today. And those are also matters that we do not want to discuss out in the open.
That's one of the expansionary pillars. The other was traditionally announcing big projects. We have some still on the table, the Ben-Borneo Highway. We have infrastructure projects that probably will still be maintained moving forward. Do you think there'll be a finality to this in this budget? Will we finally know which projects are axed, which projects are on the table, and the cost?
I don't think so. There would be a finality in this budget, because it's still early, Terence. It's only 5 months. But we would see at least where we are heading. So to say which project is X, which project is not, some of them we have given commitment. Like if you could see the ECRL, that's why you can see every now and then it's on, it's off, it's given to MMC Gamuda, it's taken back, it's given back. So there are a lot of things to consider. It's not something that could be solved within a month or two. It will take even, I would say, years. So, but on the other hand, coming back to the earlier one, when you were saying about the ASEAN, the globalization, the first thing that Tun, after taking over, is to talk to our counterpart in Indonesia about a joint national car. So I think Tun is very much into this. But like what Firdaus have said earlier, it's not the same now, especially in the era of IR 4.0. It has redefined the whole regional, or say globalization and everything. So it becomes much more complicated than what it used to be before.
Yeah, it's not as easy as moving back into a traditional industry. There are new industries that we can explore. Some that have already been given highlights. For example, of course, the digital economy. But there is also that proposition to tax the digital economy. Do you think that's a wise move, seeing as how there are many individuals pursuing their own digital business? A tax on digital economy would mean, reducing the size of their revenue, and they're not earning all that much. Firdaus.
Well, the long answer is, it's still up to the government how they want to frame taxation, as under a big umbrella. But the short answer is that you're going to penalize efficiency. People who do not want to have a retail outlet, people who manage to sell goods for cheaper, faster, better. Are we going to penalize that?
Right.
So if that's where we're signaling to investors, things may not be as rosy as might be think, because investors today have options. It's not like how it was in the past, whereby as far as ASEAN is concerned, there were only 1 or 2 countries that was open to international investors, but today almost all of them are.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that moving forward. How do we bring back these international investments? We've noticed that some of them have left. There's a lot of money that was purportedly taken out of the Malaysian markets. Is there a way to regain investor confidence?
I would say the potential is high, Terence. We used to be the preferred destination for a lot of countries. But then again, Terence, we have to look at it from both angles. While we want to attract real good FDIs, which has positive spillovers, which has good component of transfer of technology, we do not want to be the pollution heaven. You see, what's happening here is, at the moment, is Malaysia is considered as a pollution heaven. Something that could not be done in their countries, they could do it here. It's not because of anything else, it's because of regulation. So we do not want these kind of things. And what's happening with the other projects, mostly the projects that originate from China, if I might say, there's very minimal spillover. The labors are brought in from China, the raw materials are brought in from China, the technology is from China, even to a certain extent in some of the projects, even the food and beverage are brought in from China. So where is the spillover effect? Where do we benefit from this? So what Tun have said, and I think the new cabinet, the government, the ministries have already agreed, I think we have to be very choosy on the type of FDI we want. Yes, we want the foreign companies, the foreign firms, foreign nations to invest in Malaysia, but we want to pick and choose. We are not going to say anybody can come, anything can go.
This was also one of the highlights of...
Can I just add one point on that? I think we probably have been looking into the notion of FDI inflow into the country the wrong way. Simply because wages determines the type of industries you create, and it's never the other way around. You know, because if you were to compare, have a regional comparison, we are considered still cost efficient, cheap.
Our wages are still...
Because wages are still cheap. Why wages are still cheap? Because there's no avenue for the government to increase wages. We try to tackle inflation, and we say that inflation is bad, but in fact inflation is a necessary evil. Without inflation, wages cannot surpass productivity. Without that, there won't be wages increase. And because of that, we will continue to attract this kind of investments, the low skill, low quality, low value type of investments, because there's no need for investors to look into Malaysia as someone or a country that can produce good quality skilled workers.
And that's also another issue. You did mention about catering towards education. I do believe that education is important, but that higher level of education to take our people forward, that's lacking, I believe. We only leave it so far. How do we bring forward the mindset of the people? And I do believe that's one of the thrusts. It's called empowering human capital. How do we effectively do that, Firdaus?
Again, I would go back to a couple of things. Number one is wages, as I mentioned. Secondly, is that it's not just about the competition of wages, but the world that we live in today is completely different in a way that even if we have that, even if we are competitive in terms of wages, are we competitive in terms of our direct tax? Not so much compared to our regional partners. Again, go one step further. Some of these countries offer dual citizenship. We don't. In fact, there are countries that are pretty much unthinkable in the past to offer dual citizenship are now trying to test the idea of having dual citizenship, because it's a very globalized world. People are very mobile today compared to what it was before. So, if we still keep looking into our public policy as something that is static, we would see that we will be left out sooner rather than later. And I guess that's probably one thing that we should probably look at it in totality.
Well, that's interesting. I think we've picked out some very interesting points which were not on the table when we started this conversation. So it is quite a moving forward conversation in terms of where we're going. But now we're going to go to the people. We have a camera that's gone out to the public, and let's see what you want from the budget. Is it still the same wish list from 2018? Or do you have a brand new one for budget 2019? Let's take a look.
I hope to see improvements in our education system, improvements in the teaching methods, on the syllabus, promoting problem solving and thinking rather than theoretical-based education. And I also would like to see more allocation in the school upkeep and maintenance rather than building more schools. So basically I seek quality over quantity.
Okay, there is two things. One is education fund. I hope government give some fund for, allocate fund for Tamil school to build multi-purpose hall. So by building the multi-purpose hall, government school can survive on their own. So they can do many activities with the, they can rent the multi-purpose hall and get the money from there and, can do some activities. And second thing about the PTPTN reschedule. Many people not afford to pay the PTPTN loan. So that's why they reschedule the PTPTN. And after the reschedule, I noticed they cannot take a loan for the housing loan or car loan. They are really suffering from, because of this. So hope government do something on it.
As a Malaysian, I'm looking for a budget that's friendly to the everyday guy on the street. In terms of taxation, in terms of policies that the government can actually bring down to bring down the cost of living. So that's something that for the average guy would want to see. We're also looking at how government can support businesses, particularly on energy business. So it's something that's quite important for us in Malaysia, particularly when it deals with CO2 mitigation and climate change. So maybe something like that.
I really hope that this budget will really bring good things, more benefits to Malaysian. So with all the facilities and like enhancement of transportation and medical-wise and all that. So nothing else but anything that good for Malaysian.
I'm hoping that at least the single mothers would get a bit more contribution for this coming budget, because a lot of times they are very sidelined, yeah? And that the government would look into a lot of the people who are probably affected by the change in government, because, the contracts and everything are being re-looked at and redefined. And I think it's really important that these people be placed somewhere in terms of their jobs and the fact that they have a family to support. That's really, really important for the current rakyat, yeah. I think maybe it should also be the people who are OKU, yeah, because a lot of the benefits does not match what they have to go through on a day-to-day basis, yeah.
Well, we did not edit that footage, so therefore you get a lot of different requests, some which do not belong in the ambit of a budget. But nevertheless, thank you for taking our poll and answering those questions. So there are a lot of expectations from the public, some which I don't think we can fulfill in a budget per se, but they do echo some broader-based sentiments in terms of education, and we've been talking about this. Let's look at this pillar of inclusive development and well-being. We just said that 62% of the workforce is in the lower skill category. How do we upskill our workers but not chase investors away? The existing jobs that are here are not that high paying. So how do we restructure that? Because that's the only way we're going to grow.
I think the figures were given by Brother Firdaus earlier. So it's almost two-thirds of the workforce is SPM labours. You do not have to have a degree to be a skilled worker. You can also be a skilled worker via the TVET. You see, I know the new government is trying to champion TVET, but I really hope it will not receive the same outcome as what vocational have received so far. About 10, 12 years ago, we had this dream of these vocational students being trained in technical skills and everything. When they graduate at the age of 17, they should be having at least a diploma. But the sad thing is there have been a lot of cohorts which have graduated, but that diploma is not recognized even to continue for a degree. Why? No continuity. And the other thing is, Terence, the problem is the Malaysian mentality. The moment you say TVET, technical, vocational, people always say this as a low class. People always say this is always considered with dirty, dangerous, and all those things. In fact, these people are skilled. These people should be the backbone of a lot of industries. Then we would be able to attract much more valuable FDI.
Trust me, Prof, the limelight is on TVET. We have YB Nur Izzah in charge of TVET right now. And I was just in Johor. We spent 2.5 hours focusing on TVET and the many issues, and the 2.5 hours were not enough. So that's a whole different discussion. And I do believe we're having that now, finally. We're having that discussion at a governmental level, and the minister is on this. So he is definitely looking into TVET, so let's hope something good comes of it. But I do not think it would be in the budget per se. However, what should be in the budget is something that will help TVET workers, graduates with TVET qualifications, get jobs. There's a new levy that's been proposed for firms hiring foreign workers. Will reducing the dependency on foreign labour help us in any way, Firdaus?
Interesting question, because I think we are trying to make foreign labour more costly by introducing this levy. But the problem is that it's not going to be, I don't think that is going to be the net effect of what we intend to do. Because at the end of the day, if you make foreign workers be more expensive through that, there will be ways for people not to make it so.
Okay. Well, that comes back to governance, doesn't it?
That comes back to governance. That comes back to the problem of immigration. What is our immigration policies and so on.
Sorry, I just would like to add to that, Terence. 90% of the foreign workers are in an unskilled area.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure how TVET is going to affect that. But I would rather these foreign workers be replaced with automation. The government should, incentivize automation. So it's like a two-pronged attack. You could reduce the foreign workers' dependency. At the same time, you could upscale. And when you start introducing this automation and everything to replace the foreign workers, it will also create an opportunity for skilled workers or semi-skilled workers, where the TVET could take advantage of that.
When we talk about the final pillar, strengthening economic growth, growing that economic pie, the expansionary side of the budget usually comes into play, but admittedly this year we do not have that much to focus on this area. How can we grow our economy moving forward past 2019? 2020 is when that vision, or part of that vision, is supposed to be realized. So we do not have that much time to catch up, and I do believe that Tun has conceded that 2020 will not be what he originally inspired it to be. How do we grow our economy despite what we have to work with, Firdaus?
A couple of ways. One, we have to make it very, very clear about what sort of drivers of growth do we want to create in the future. Right now, whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not, our drivers of growth, the underlying driver of growth, has always been centered on Bumiputra. Because almost in every agency, every segment, every part of the government has some Bumiputra element on it. I think there would probably be a point whereby this is probably maxed out. We have to think about other ways to find new sources of growth that based on something else that but it's not based on the strategies that we have done in the past. We've tried to address this through the new economic model, but then it was being the response towards having more inclusive growth, more meritocracy was met with various politicking from various fronts. I think that for us to think about new sources of growth is probably the key about looking at how Bumiputra would look like in the future. That's one. Second is that if it were to be anything, it would have to be done based on how we're going to address wages in the future. Like Prof just said, we need to encourage more automation. We have introduced minimum wage in the past, but there's another supplementary element to wages that is not being addressed, but is going to be addressed, which is the labor, the labor sector. Under the RMK review, RMK 11 review, it was said that there will be three new laws, three labor laws that will be amended, reviewed, based on current scenarios. I think that will complement the minimum wage quite nicely. But the fact is that we have to be entirely very careful about this, because if we don't do it properly, then wages will not go up, but automation will take place. And that will be the conundrum that we will face.
Loss of jobs, and people will be in trouble. Prof, what's your take on this? How do we grow our economy?
That's a very good question, Terence. Well, we want to be back as an ASEAN tiger. For me, the way forward is number one, SMEs, number two, youth. I think it's high time we give a focus to youth startup. Youth startup in what we say in a potentially good areas, and definitely technology. When we speak about technology, it's not per se technology. It can be agro-tech. It can be edu-tech, anything about that. But the youth startup, if you look at most of the advanced countries, youth form a big chunk of these SMEs. And these SMEs have been a cushion for Malaysia in the 1997 crisis, in 2001 crisis, 2007 crisis. I think currently SMEs are contributing to about, if I'm not mistaken, about 58% of the GDP. So we should be focusing on these SMEs, strengthening them, empowering them, and energizing them. So SMEs and youth, for me, is the new engine of growth we're looking forward. And the other thing I would like to say, the difference between Tun and the previous regime, while the previous regime was looking for higher income, the nominal income, I think Tun and his cabinet is looking for the real income side. So it's not a matter of increase in income, but a matter of increase in the purchasing power.
Disposable income.
Disposable income. What's the point of you having a higher income, but the price is, inflated at the same time? You end up, it might be even worse.
Right. In finality, I just want to also get into this. Besides debt, there are a lot of other figures which were put forward by the previous administration. We've called a lot of that into question, but yet we see a lot of the same figures reflected in the reports. So do you think there will be an overhaul of these figures?
You mean in terms of
unemployment rates, GDP?
No, not. I think it will probably be very much similar to what we have done in the past. I think for us to look into, then again, you see, the notion that we must operate at full employment, which means that the unemployment rate has to be 4% and below, that would mean that we would probably find ways to fill up that empty post. And we don't, we probably resort to immigration. And that is probably the mistake of the previous government, because we have not managed to close the tap on immigration, and that's why we see the continuous influx of foreign workers, and then we see that there are contrasting numbers whether these guys are actually documented, legal, illegal, and so there will be a point in the future where we have to think about what would happen if X percentage of these guys actually overstayed for so many years.
Which they already have.
Yep.
Yes.
And that will probably be a political problem in the future, because under the three labor laws that I mentioned, one of them is, effectively promoting freedom of association, which means that foreign workers are also able to set up their own trade unions and also have right to strike. So how do we go forward with this? And that's, I think, the managing transition towards a new Malaysia is probably the biggest thing that we have to address today.
We've opened up many little pockets of discussions within this one big one. So I hope that that's food for thought for you moving forward into the tabling of the budget on the 2nd of November. I want to thank both my guests for being here in the studio. Thank you, Firdaus Rosli, for being here. Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Baharul Mahmud Hamid, for being here as well. On the 2nd of November, the Honourable Minister of Finance will be tabling the budget live in Parliament. The Honourable Prime Minister will be tabling the budget live in Parliament. So we look forward to that. And we hope that you will chime in the conversation on the 3rd when we come back with the post-budget analysis. Thank you very much for being here on the program. I'm Terence Ras, signing off.